When most people hear the word
Rwanda, they think of one thing. 100 days in 1994, up to 1 million people killed, neighbors turning on neighbors, the world watching and looking away. That story is true. It is also not the whole story. 30 years on, the country that made that headline is one of the safest in Africa. Walking the streets of its capital after dark is something foreign business travelers describe with surprise. Plastic bags have been illegal since 2008, confiscated at the airport from anyone who arrives carrying one. The last Saturday of every month, the entire country closes. Buses stop, shops shutter, traffic disappears, and millions of people, the president included, pick up tools and clean their own neighborhoods. More women sit in Rwanda's parliament than in any other parliament on earth, over 60%. The country that lost up to 1 million of its own people in 3 months has, in the 3 decades since, been ranked by foreign business leaders, by aid agencies, by global indexes, among the most efficient, least corrupt, most ambitious places on the African continent. None of which makes the 100 days less true. Both things are real at the same time. The country that fell apart and the country that came back. How does a place rebuild from a wound that deep? And what does the rebuilding cost? This is Rwanda, a landlocked country of roughly 14 million people, smaller than the US state of Maryland, sitting just south of the equator in the Great Rift Valley of East Central Africa. Rwandans call it the country of 1,000 hills. From the air, that name is not poetic, it is descriptive. The land is wave after wave of folded green ridges. Rivers running through every valley, terraces climbing every slope. There is almost no flat ground. In the northwest, the Virunga volcanoes rise, 8 of them strung along the border with Congo and Uganda. Karisimbi, the highest, reaches more than 4,500 meters. On its lower slopes, in the bamboo and the mist, live the last mountain gorillas on Earth. In the west, the land falls away into Lake Kivu, one of Africa's Great Lakes, a geological anomaly, a body of water that holds enough dissolved methane and carbon dioxide to suffocate millions if it ever rose to the surface. We will come back to it. In the south, an old rainforest called Nyungwe feeds rivers that drain in 2 directions. Some flow west, becoming the Congo. Others flow east, becoming the Nile. In the east, savanna, acacia trees and papyrus swamps, and against all odds, lions again. All of this in a country roughly the size of a small American state. And in the middle of it, on a ridge 1,500 meters above sea level, sits the capital, Kigali. The streets are clean. Not metaphorically, literally. There is no litter. The motorcycle taxi drivers wear numbered orange vests registered with the city. The buses are on time. The traffic, by African capital standards, is calm. A foreign journalist visiting in 2018, working for a major American business publication, wrote that Kigali reminded him of Singapore in the early years. He was not the first person to make the comparison. The president of Rwanda has been making it himself for over 20 years. But Singapore had decades of stability to build from. Kigali had ash. In April of 1994, this city was the center of the killing. The The roadblocks were here. The radio stations broadcasting the lists of names, the Tutsis to be hunted, the moderate Hutus to be removed, were here. The Kigali Genocide Memorial, on a hillside in the Gizozi district, holds the remains of approximately 250,000 people, buried beneath gardens of roses and bougainvillea. Visitors walk between the gardens in silence. Some of those visitors are Rwandans, whose families are buried here, whose families they came to find here, whose families they are still finding here. The memorial keeps a register. It is not finished. A few kilometers down the same hill, in the convention district, stands a circular building lit at night in changing colors. The green and blue spiral of the Kigali Convention Center. It opened in 2016. It has hosted the African Union, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, summits the Western press once would not have imagined holding here. A few kilometers further, in a special economic zone east of the airport, sits the Kigali Innovation City, Rwanda's bid to become a regional technology hub. Carnegie Mellon University runs its first African campus there. The country is trying, by deliberate design, to skip past the industrial stage of development and land directly in the digital one. None of this happened by accident. In the year 2000, 6 years after the genocide ended, the new Rwandan government published a document called Vision 2020. It set targets for what the country would look like in 20 years: middle income status, near universal primary education, dramatic reductions in maternal and infant mortality, a women-led parliament, a knowledge-based economy. Most of those targets were hit on schedule. The architect of the plan was a former rebel commander, born in Rwanda, raised as a refugee in Uganda, who had led the army that ended the genocide. His name is Paul Kagame. He has been president since 2000, and the country he runs today exists in his image. Disciplined, organized, ambitious, intolerant of opposition, watched closely by its admirers and its critics alike. We will come back to him too, to what he built and to what was paid for it. But first, the rest of the country. Fly 30 minutes northwest of Kigali and the land changes. The hills steepen, the mist thickens, roads narrow. The town of Musanze appears at the foot of the volcanoes, and behind it, rising into cloud, the high green walls of Volcanoes National Park. This park is 16,000 hectares of bamboo, montane forest, and moorland draped across the lower slopes of 5 volcanoes. It was first protected in 1925 by the Belgian colonial government, the oldest national park in Africa. It is the world's most important refuge for one species in particular: the mountain gorilla. There are, today, just over 1,000 mountain gorillas left on Earth. Roughly half of them live here in this park on these volcanoes. They eat bamboo and wild celery and gallium vines. They live in family groups led by a single dominant silverback male. They do not survive in captivity. They have never been bred outside the wild. An adult silverback can weigh more than 200 kilograms. He moves through the bamboo on knuckles thick as a man's wrist, eats sitting back like an old farmer, watches everything around him with eyes that are uncomfortably familiar. In the late 1960s, there were perhaps 250 mountain gorillas left in the world. They were being hunted for trophies and infants. Silverbacks shot dead so their hands could be sold as ashtrays, babies stolen for foreign zoos. The species was on the edge of vanishing. In September of 1967, an American primatologist named Diane Fossey arrived on the saddle between Mount Karasimbi and Mount Bisoke and built a small camp. She called it Karasoke. She was 35 years old. She had no academic training in primatology. She had been sent by the paleoanthropologist Louis Leakey to do for gorillas what Jane Goodall was doing for chimpanzees. She lived on the volcano for 18 years. She learned the gorillas individually. She gave them names. She catalogued their family structures, their vocalizations, their politics. She published a book in 1983 called Gorillas in the Mist that taught the world what these animals actually were. Not the King Kong of cinema, but in her words, dignified, highly social, gentle giants. She also discovered, very quickly, that science was not enough. The poachers were still operating. The traps were still being laid. In 1977, a silverback she had known for years, a gorilla named Digit, the first to have ever reached out and touched her hand, was killed by poachers. They cut off his head and his hands. The hands were bound for a private buyer. She found him in the forest. She wrote about it in the magazines that paid attention to her work. She raised money. She started funding patrols of her own. A year later, in 1978, Rwandan officials authorized the capture of 2 infant gorillas to be shipped to a German zoo. To take the infants, the poachers had killed 20 adult gorillas, entire families, because the only way to capture a baby in the wild is to kill everyone protecting it. Fossey was given the surviving infants for medical treatment, restored them to a fragile health, and pleaded for them not to be sent. They were sent anyway. Both died in captivity within 9 years. She never forgave the decision. In 1979, her own teams destroyed 987 traps in a few months. The Rwandan Park Service team, that same year, destroyed one. December 26, 1985. Diane Fossey is murdered in her cabin at Karasoke. Her killer is never identified. Theories range from poachers seeking revenge to gold smugglers to political enemies of her conservation work. She is buried a few meters from her cabin, beside Digit, in the gorilla cemetery she had built herself. Today, that grave is a pilgrimage site. Tourists walk the trail to it through the bamboo, past gorilla families that ignore them now because, in the years after her death, the work she started became national policy. In the early 1990s, the Rwandan government and international conservation partners formalized what is now one of the most regulated wildlife tourism programs on Earth. A trekking permit costs $750. Each gorilla family can be visited by no more than 8 people in a day for no more than 1 hour. Visitors must wear masks. The gorillas are vulnerable to human respiratory diseases. Volcanoes National Park now generates over $15 million in annual permit revenue. Much of it flows back into the surrounding community: schools, clinics, roads, jobs for the trackers who walk the slopes every morning before dawn. Many of those trackers are former poachers. Their fathers hunted these animals. They protect them. The gorilla population in the years since the genocide ended has more than tripled. The same forest is also home to another primate found nowhere else outside the Albertine Rift, the golden monkey. Smaller, faster, with a copper-red back and an alert dark face, they move through the bamboo in troops of 50 or 60. They are bamboo specialists, and they are visible. Where the gorillas are slow and contemplative, the golden monkeys are mercury, flickering through the canopy, vanishing, reappearing. 2 species, 1 park, both, like the country around them, recovering. Drive south from the volcanoes, down the spine of the country, and the land changes again. The hills smooth. The bamboo gives way to terraced tea fields, the tea fields to lakes. After 3 hours, the road meets the western border, and the western border is water. Lake Kivu. It is one of the African Great Lakes. Around 2,400 square kilometers of fresh water lying in the western branch of the Great Rift between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. From the Rwandan shore, you can see across to the volcano of Mount Nyiragongo on the Congolese side, sometimes glowing red at night. Lake Kivu is, by any tourist measure, beautiful. Volcanic islands, glassy mornings, fishermen in long pirogues paddling out at dawn, 3 boats roped together singing a paddle song to keep time. The lake is also one of the most dangerous bodies of water on the planet. At its deepest, Kivu is more than 470 meters deep. The water at the bottom is saltier and warmer than the water at the top. It does not mix. It just sits there. Beneath that thermal boundary, in the lower layers of the lake, is dissolved gas, carbon dioxide and methane, fed in over thousands of years by volcanic activity below the lake bed. How much gas? Approximately 300 cubic kilometers of carbon dioxide, 60 cubic kilometers of methane, trapped under pressure, held in solution by the weight of the water above it. 2 other lakes in the world are known to have this kind of stratification: Lake Nyos and Lake Manoon, both in Cameroon. In the 1980s, both of them released their gases at once, in a phenomenon scientists call a limnic eruption. A cloud of carbon dioxide rolled out of the water and across the surrounding villages. Nearly 1,800 people and many thousands of livestock suffocated in their sleep. Around 2 million people live on the shores of Lake Kivu. If Kivu ever erupted in the same way, the death toll would be hard to imagine. The Rwandan response, characteristically, has been to turn the danger into an asset. In 2008, a small pilot plant began extracting methane from the lake to fire the boilers of a Rwandan brewery. In 2015, a much larger facility, a floating platform of 3,000 tons of concrete and steel, moored a few kilometers offshore from the town of Kibuye, went online. It is called Kivu Watt. Here is how it works. A pipe descends 350 meters into the deep layer of the lake. Gas-rich water is pumped up to the platform. As the pressure drops on the way up, the dissolved methane and carbon dioxide come out of solution, the way the gas comes out of a soda bottle when you twist the cap. The methane is separated, sent through an underwater pipeline to a generating station on shore, and burned to make electricity. The carbon dioxide is re-injected back into the lake at a precise depth. The plant adds 26 megawatts to the Rwandan grid. Future phases aim for over 100. Over time, if it works as intended, it will gradually reduce the gas pressure in the lake itself. A lake that could kill millions of people, slowly being drained of its threat, 1 cubic meter of fuel at a time. It is perhaps the cleanest metaphor for what Rwanda has tried to do with everything else. Take the inheritance of catastrophe and ask what useful work could possibly be made of it. Drive east now. Across the spine of the country, past the capital, 4 hours toward the Tanzanian border. The hills relax. The terraces give way to flatter savanna. Acacia trees appear. The air dries. This is Akagera National Park, 1,122 square kilometers of Central Africa's largest protected wetland, savanna, montane woodland, papyrus swamp, and a chain of 10 lakes fed by the Akagera River. It is the only place in Rwanda where you can stand in tall grass and see, in a single morning, lions, elephants, giraffes, and rhinos. None of which were here 20 years ago. The genocide reached this place too. After the killing ended, hundreds of thousands of refugees who had fled to Tanzania began returning home. They had no land. The new government, under enormous pressure, allocated more than half of Akagera's protected area for resettlement. The park shrank from over 2,500 square kilometers to around 1,100. Cattle moved in. Poaching surged. The remaining wildlife collapsed. By 2001, every lion in Rwanda was dead. The last black rhinoceros disappeared from the country a few years after that. In 2010, the Rwandan government did something most governments would not do. It admitted that it could not run the park alone. It signed a co-management agreement with an international non-profit called African Parks. The agreement gave African Parks operational control. The Rwandan government retained ownership. What happened next, by African conservation standards, is one of the most thoroughly documented turnarounds on the continent. A 120-kilometer fence was built along the western boundary, separating the park from the cattle communities. Anti-poaching units were trained, equipped, and deployed, including eventually helicopter surveillance and a canine unit. Poaching dropped to near zero within a few years. In July of 2015, 7 lions arrived from a private reserve in South Africa. 2 males, 5 females. They were placed in a temporary enclosure to acclimatize. When they were released, they walked into a country where their species had been extinct for over a decade. The pride grew. By 2025, Akagera held more than 70 lions. In 2017, 18 eastern black rhinos were flown in from South Africa, 10 years after the last one in Rwanda had been killed. In 2019, 5 more arrived from European zoos, a 30-hour journey by truck and plane to deliver animals back to a continent their grandparents had left. In 2021, 30 white rhinos arrived from a reserve in South Africa, in what was at the time the largest single rhino translocation in the species' history. In June of 2025, 70 more came. Today, Akagera holds both species, eastern black rhino and southern white rhino, making it one of the few parks in the world where you can find both. The park has gone from 4,000 large mammals in 2010 to over 13,000 by 2018. Tourist numbers have climbed from 8,000 a year to over 50,000. Park revenue now covers nearly all of its operating costs. Stand on the savannah at dawn. The light pulls itself across the hills. Hippos exhale in the lakes below. A pair of grey-crowned cranes, Rwanda's national bird, with their wild golden crests, pick their way across the wet ground at the edge of a swamp. Somewhere out in the acacia, a male lion roars, the sound rolling for kilometers. None of this is accidental either. All of it was decided. Drive south now across the country, 4 hours back through Kigali and beyond. The land rises again, the road climbs. After Butare, Rwanda's old university town, the forest closes in. This is Nyungwe. It is one of the oldest rainforests in Africa. 1,000 square kilometers of dense Afromontane forest, bamboo slopes, and high wetlands sitting on the watershed between the two great river systems of the continent. The streams on its eastern flank become the Akagera, then the Kagera, and feed into the Nile. The streams on its western flank fall toward Lake Kivu and eventually become the Congo. According to one set of measurements, the most distant source of the White Nile rises in a mossy spring inside this forest. Nyungwe is older than most of the species inside it. It survived the dry climatic shifts that erased forests across much of the continent. It became a refuge, a museum of African biodiversity preserved by altitude and rain. It holds over 1,300 plant species, 300 bird species, 27 of them found only along the Albertine Rift, and 13 species of primate, one of the highest concentrations on the continent. There are over 500 chimpanzees in Nyungwe. They are tracked by guides who know their families by sight, who can tell you which young male is rising and which old patriarch is no longer setting the rules. But the most striking primate sight in the park is not the chimps. It is the colobus. The Rwenzori black and white colobus is a slender, long-tailed monkey with a flowing white mantle of fur. In most of Africa, colobus monkeys live in groups of 15, 20, perhaps 30. In Nyungwe, they live in supergroups of up to 400 individuals, the largest troop size of any primate on the continent. When they move through the canopy, the trees themselves seem to be in motion. White tails arc and disappear, branches shudder. The forest fills with a soft, conversational call that carries for hundreds of meters in any direction. A primate that, in this one place, decided to live socially on a scale no other primate in Africa attempts. It is, in its quiet way, one of the most distinctive animal behaviors anywhere on Earth. Walk the canopy bridge across the high gorge, 50 meters above the forest floor, a steel cable suspension, half a kilometer long, the first of its kind built in East Africa. Look down. The rainforest is tilted in every direction. Mist rises out of valleys. Hornbills cross beneath your feet. Far below, somewhere in that green, the Nile is starting. Travel further south, and the forest gives way to one of the most surprising places in the country. Nyanza. It is a small town a few hours south of Kigali, set among low hills. To outside eyes, it looks unremarkable. To Rwandan eyes, this was, until 1962, the center of the country's history, the capital of the old kingdom of Rwanda, the seat of the Mwami, the king. Rwanda was a kingdom for hundreds of years before it was a colony. The dynasty that ruled it traced itself back, by oral tradition, to a founder named Gihanga, whose deeds are still recited in epic poems. The court at Nyanza was the center of an artistic and intellectual life that produced its own forms of poetry, music, choreography, and law. The royal palace at Nyanza has been reconstructed on its old footprint. It is a beehive, a vast, woven dome of dried grass and reeds, several meters high, raised on a frame of curved wooden ribs. It looks more like a basket than a building. It is the architecture of a place where wood was scarce and grass was infinite. At the back of the compound, a small herd of cattle stands in the shade. They have horns longer than any cattle most visitors have ever seen, gracefully curved arcs that can reach over a meter from tip to tip. They are called Inyambo, the royal cattle. Their keepers tend them by song. The songs are old, the cows know them. During royal ceremonies in the centuries before the monarchy ended, these animals were dressed in jewelry and led in stately procession. The keepers would sing, and the cows would follow the singing, walking with the careful slowness of animals who know they are being watched. That tradition still exists. It is performed at Nyanza for tourists now, but also occasionally for state visitors, on the days the country wants to show what it was before everything else. Travel east toward the Tanzanian border. The land flattens. Banana plantations climb the hillsides. Just before the river that marks the frontier, a small road branches off toward a workshop in the village of Nyakarambi. Inside the workshop, women are painting cow dung onto wooden boards. This is imigongo. It is one of the most distinctive art forms on the African continent, a tradition of geometric painting made from cow dung mixed with ash, clay, and natural pigments, applied in thick relief onto wooden surfaces in spirals, diamonds, and chevrons of black, white, and brick red. It originated in the eastern province of Rwanda in the late 1700s, attributed by tradition to a prince named Akagera, the son of the king of Gisaka. For 2 centuries, it was used to decorate the interior walls of homes and the royal palaces. After the genocide, the women's cooperatives in this region revived the practice. They taught it to a new generation. They sell their work in Kigali galleries and to international collectors. A material that exists everywhere in rural Rwanda, cow dung, turned by patience and pattern into something a museum will hang on a wall. Return to Kigali. It is the last Saturday of the month. The streets are empty. This is Umuganda. The word translates roughly as coming together for a common purpose. By national law, on the last Saturday of every month, every Rwandan between the ages of 16 and 65 participates in 3 hours of community work in their own neighborhood. Buses stop, shops close, traffic vanishes from the roads. What people do depends on what their neighborhood needs. Schools get built, drainage ditches get cleared, trees get planted, houses are constructed for the elderly and the vulnerable. The president himself, whichever of Kigali's 18 districts he is assigned to that month, picks up tools and works alongside everyone else. Umuganda was institutionalized in 1995, the year after the genocide ended. The new government was looking for ways to rebuild trust between people who had, in many cases, killed each other's relatives. Working together on a tangible task, they reasoned, was a place to begin. It has been done every month for 30 years. This is also why Kigali is clean. There is no separate sanitation worker class doing the work that the rest of the city ignores. The city cleans itself. To a foreign visitor, Umuganda can look idyllic. To Rwandans, it is more complicated than that. A tradition that is also a duty, a community that is also an obligation, a system that asks something of you, whether you would have offered it freely or not. Most participate. Some resent it. Almost none refuse, because refusal is its own visibility. In 2006, the same government tried something else. They called it Girinka. The word translates as, "May you have a cow." The premise is straightforward. Each poor, rural family in Rwanda is given a single dairy cow. The first female calf the cow produces must be passed on to a neighbor. That neighbor, in turn, passes their first female calf to the next. Over time, the cows spread through the country, the way the singing in the Inyambo enclosures spread through the centuries before. Slowly, in a pattern that connects households together by an obligation neither side can refuse. By 2018, more than 340,000 cows had been distributed under the program. Children in those households were measurably less malnourished. Milk yields had gone up. Manure had gone back onto fields that had been depleted for generations. The recipients of the first calves became the donors of the next, and the social contract was rebuilt one cow at a time, on the only currency rural Rwanda had ever fully understood. In a country where the most loaded category of identity before the genocide had been who herded cattle and who farmed the land, the choice to rebuild on cattle was not accidental either. All of this, the streets, the gorillas, the lions returning, the lake's gas turning into electricity, the painted boards in Nyakarambi, the women in parliament, the working Saturday morning, sits on top of something that has not been said in any of these places yet. It needs to be said now. In 1932, the Belgian colonial administration of Rwanda introduced identity cards. Each card carried, beside the name, an ethnic designation, Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa. Before that card, those words had described overlapping social categories. The Hutu were largely farmers, the Tutsi largely cattle keepers, the Twa largely forest people, but a wealthy Hutu could become a Tutsi, and a Tutsi who lost his cattle could become a Hutu. The categories moved. The card froze them. The Belgians, who had inherited the colony from Germany after the First World War, were operating under a racial theory popular in 19th century Europe, that the Tutsi were a separate, more refined race, possibly originating elsewhere. They favored Tutsi for administrative positions, for education, for advancement. They built a system in which one ethnic category was permanently above another. When the colonial period ended, that resentment came out the other end. In 1959, 3 years before formal independence, a Hutu uprising overthrew the Tutsi king. Tens of thousands of Tutsi were killed. Around 150,000 fled to neighboring countries, to Uganda, Burundi, Tanzania, Congo. Among the refugee children was a 2-year-old boy named Paul Kagame, carried by his parents across the border into Uganda. Periodic anti-Tutsi killings continued through the 1960s into the 1970s. By 1973, when General Juvenal Habyarimana came to power in a coup, much of the Tutsi minority either lived in fear inside the country or as exiles outside it. In 1990, the children of those exiles came back. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, was founded in Uganda by Tutsi refugees who had grown up in camps and gone on to fight in Yoweri Museveni's army. In October of 1990, they crossed the border into northern Rwanda with a few thousand soldiers under arms. Their initial commander was killed almost immediately. A young intelligence officer training in the United States flew home to take over. His name was Paul Kagame. He was 33 years old. The civil war that followed lasted 3 years. In August of 1993, with international pressure mounting, the RPF and the Habyarimana government signed a peace agreement in the Tanzanian town of Arusha. It called for power sharing, refugee return, integration of the two armies. A United Nations peacekeeping force was sent to oversee the transition. Its commander was a Canadian general named Romeo Dallaire. In the months after the Arusha Accords, Hutu hardliners who opposed the deal began compiling lists. They stockpiled weapons, including hundreds of thousands of imported machetes. They built a private radio station, Radio Télévision Libre des Mille Collines, or RTLM, that broadcast openly racist propaganda about Tutsis as a foreign infestation. In January of 1994, General Dallaire learned of the weapons caches. He sent a now famous telegram to UN headquarters in New York requesting permission to seize them. He was refused. The plane was shot down on the evening of April 6, 1994. At 1825 Greenwich Mean Time, a French-built Falcon 50 jet carrying the presidents of Rwanda and Burundi descends toward Kigali Airport on its return flight from the latest round of negotiations in Tanzania. 2 missiles are launched from somewhere on the ground near the airport perimeter. Both find the aircraft. The plane breaks apart in the air and falls into the gardens of the presidential residence. There are no survivors. Within 90 minutes, roadblocks are appearing across Kigali. By dawn the next day, soldiers of the Presidential Guard, accompanied by Interahamwe, the youth militia of the ruling party, begin moving house to house. The first names on their lists are Hutu moderates. The Prime Minister, Agathe Uwilingiyimana, is killed in her home. The 10 Belgian peacekeepers assigned to protect her are taken to a military camp and killed there. The killings that follow are not chaotic. They are organized. Each commune has its lists. Each roadblock checks identity cards. People are stopped, identified by the ethnic designation imposed by Belgian administrators 60 years earlier, and killed on the spot. Tutsi who try to flee to churches, believing, as their families had believed in earlier waves of violence, that churches would be sanctuaries, are murdered inside them. At Nyamata Church, 10,000 people are killed in a single attack. At Intarama, 5,000. At Murambi Technical School in the south, where some 45,000 Tutsis have gathered in the hope of safety, soldiers and militia kill nearly all of them in 3 days. The killing is largely done by hand. Machetes, clubs, the implements of agriculture turned against the population. An estimated 200,000 ordinary Hutu civilians participate alongside the soldiers and the militias. Neighbors kill neighbors. In some cases, husbands kill wives, or families kill the partners their children have married. In the western hills above Lake Kivu, a community of Tutsi farmers in the area called Bisesero refuse to die quietly. They gather on a high ridge, perhaps 50,000 people at the peak, men, women, children, and they fight back. They fight with stones, with farm tools, with whatever the land will give them. They hold the hill for weeks. The army returns again and again, with reinforcements, with grenades, with the ruthlessness of an enemy that knows exactly where its targets have gone. By mid-May, the resistance is broken. Of the 50,000 who climbed Bisesero, fewer than 2,000 survive. A French-led international force arrives in the area in late June, weeks after most of the killing has been done. By the time they reach the surviving Tutsis on the hills, there is almost no one left to save. The international community withdraws. Belgium pulls its peacekeepers out of Rwanda after the killing of the 10 soldiers in Kigali. The United States State Department refuses, for nearly 2 months, to formally use the word genocide, because using it would invoke legal obligations to act. The United Nations Security Council reduces General Dallaire's force from 2,500 to 270. Dallaire, against the rules, refuses to leave. He shelters as many people as he can in the buildings he still controls. He pleads, in cables that are now part of the historical record, for permission to act. He is refused. The killing rate in Rwanda at its peak is roughly 4 times the rate of the Holocaust at its height. By the middle of May, an estimated 800,000 people are dead. The final figure, by the official Rwandan count, is over 1 million. The lower scholarly estimates fall around 500,000.
The exact number will never be known,
because in many communes, no one is left to count. The thing that ends the genocide is not the international community. It is the army of refugee children. The RPF, which has been fighting since 1990, advances through the country during the genocide itself, taking territory, sheltering survivors, encircling the genocidal government. On July 4, 1994, RPF soldiers under Paul Kagame's command enter Kigali. The interim government collapses. The remnants of the genocidal forces flee west across the border into what was then Zaire, taking with them, in some estimates, 2 million Hutu civilians who feared retribution. On July 19th, a new Rwandan government is sworn in. Kagame becomes vice president and minister of defense. He becomes president in 2000. This is what was inherited. A country with a destroyed economy, a judicial system in which 2/3 of the judges had been killed or had fled, prisons holding more than 100,000 suspects awaiting genocide trials they could not realistically be given, a population in which most adults were victims, perpetrators, witnesses, or all three at once. Roads gone, schools gone, hospitals gone, money gone. The infrastructure of civic trust gone in a way that had never been gone before in any modern state. How does a country come back from that? The answer, the Rwandan answer, was not the courts. In 2001, the new government revived a traditional dispute resolution practice, gacaca, pronounced gacaca. The word means literally justice on the grass. In pre-colonial Rwanda, gacaca had been the way villages resolved disputes between neighbors over land, cattle, marriages, by gathering on a hillside and talking it out under the supervision of community elders. The post-genocide government scaled it up. They built nearly 12,000 local gacaca courts, each one operating in a single village or district. Judges were not trained lawyers. They were ordinary Rwandans elected by their neighbors for their reputation for honesty. Lawyers were not permitted to participate. The accused stood in the open air in front of the people they had grown up with. Between 2002 and 2012, the gacaca courts heard more than 1.2 million cases. The gacaca process was not a trial in any Western sense. It was something stranger and harder. The accused were given the chance to confess, to name what they had done, to identify others who had participated, and to ask for forgiveness. Sentences for those who confessed and showed remorse were often commuted to community service, which in practice meant rebuilding the homes of the survivors whose families they had destroyed. The courts were criticized, fairly, by international human rights organizations. They lacked due process, they were vulnerable to false accusation, to manipulation, to score settling. In some cases they were used, in many cases they were not enough. And yet, they did something the international tribunals would never have managed. They put 1 million cases through a process. They put names to bodies that had never been buried. They allowed survivors to know who had killed their parents, in which field, on which day, and to face that person across a hillside, meeting in their own village. In some communes, perpetrators and survivors live as neighbors today, on the same land, the children of one playing with the children of the other, because the gacaca process required them to. It is not reconciliation in any clean sense. It is not closure. It is something harder than either. It is a country that decided it could not afford to fail. The country that emerged from those years is not what the international human rights community would design from scratch. The political opposition has been weakened by arrests, by exile, by, in some cases, assassination. Independent media is constrained. Several former allies of Paul Kagame, men who once served in his inner circle and later turned against him, have died abroad in suspicious circumstances. In 2015, the Constitution was amended to allow him to remain in office until 2034. Rwanda's military involvement in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the M23 rebel movement has been accused of operating with Rwandan support, has produced a humanitarian crisis that has already killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. The official Rwandan position is that this involvement is defensive, that the same genocidaires who fled west in 1994 are still operating in eastern Congo today, still organized, still threatening the Tutsi communities living there. There is evidence for this position. There is also evidence for the case against it. Both things, again, are true at the same time. To stand in Kigali today, on a clean street on a Saturday morning, watching ordinary Rwandans pick up their tools and walk to a hilltop, is to witness something that, by every reasonable historical projection, should not exist. To stand at the genocide memorial beneath which 250,000 people are buried, and to know that thousands of those killed died at the hands of neighbors who walk the same streets today, is to understand that whatever has been built here was built on top of that. The miracle and the cost are not separable. They are the same fact, seen from different distances. In the late afternoon, the light over Kigali turns gold, and the motorcycle taxis weave home in their numbered orange vests, and the cranes lift over the gardens of the genocide memorial as if they had not been told what is buried there. Out at Akagera, the lions move into the cooler grass. The new white rhinos, still adjusting, raise their heads when the wind shifts. The keepers in Nyanza walk the Inyambo cattle in their slow ceremonial circle, singing the same song that was being sung here 100 years ago, and 200 years before that. In the bamboo above Karasoke, a silverback who never knew Dian Fossey leans back to scratch his stomach with hands the size of dinner plates. His infant climbs over his shoulder. A tracker, the son of a man who once hunted these animals, watches at a respectful distance and says nothing. 30 years. A country that could so easily have not survived the first of them, doing the work of becoming itself again. Whether what has been built can hold for another 30, through the next leadership transition, through the next regional crisis, through the next generation of Rwandans, who will be the first to grow up entirely after the genocide rather than in its long shadow, no one can honestly say. The country knows that better than anyone watching it. It is perhaps the deepest thing the rebuilding has taught, that a place can be remade, but that the remaking is never finished, and that the work of holding it together must be done again, in some form, every generation. More than 70% of Rwandans alive today were born after 1994. They have no personal memory of what their country survived. They have grown up under one system, one set of expectations, one understanding of what their country is meant to be. The classrooms they sit in were built under Umuganda. The cattle their families graze came through Gurinka. The streets they walk are clean because everyone they know has spent a Saturday morning a month, every month, making them so. What they make of all of it, what they keep, what they question, what they reform, will be the next chapter. It is already being written, by them, in pencil on paper, that the older generation has only just managed to keep flat. On the last Saturday of next month, the streets will empty again, the buses will stop, and 14 million people will walk out into the morning to clean what they own. Thank you for spending this time in Rwanda. If this journey moved you, consider subscribing. There are more contemplative documentaries waiting for you from places most travelers never see. Until the next journey.